The morning light comes through the pass-through window of my kitchen, at the exact angle that makes everything look golden. My sous chef is already breaking down the prep list when I walk in, and the smell butter browning in a cast-iron pan, fresh thyme bundled on the cutting board, the deep mineral scent of good stock hits me like it always does. Like coming home. I stand there for just a second before anyone notices me, and I think about how my mother once told me that a kitchen was no place for someone with my potential. I think about that a lot, actually. I think about it every time a reviewer calls my food transformative. I thought about it the night my restaurant made the list, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I grew up in Wellesley, Massachusetts, in a house with a circular driveway and a mother who had the number of every private school admissions director in the state saved in her phone. My father was a partner at a corporate law firm in Boston. My older sister went to Yale, and then to Yale Law. My older brother was a cardiologist at Mass General, and I was the third child, the one who came out wrong. Not wrong in any way I could explain to a doctor. Not wrong in any way that showed up on a report card. I had fine grades, the right test scores, the expected performance that Wellesley children delivered like clockwork. I was wrong in the way that my mother noticed first, before I even had words for it. I was the one who, at 8 years old, spent an entire Thanksgiving in the kitchen with our housekeeper, instead of with the adults in the dining room. Not because I was sent there, because I wanted to be there, because I wanted to watch how the gravy came together, why the turkey skin crisped the way it did, what made the cranberry sauce taste like something instead of nothing. My mother found me standing on a step stool, stirring a pot, and the look on her face was not warmth. It was something closer to concern, the kind of look you give a child who has just said something that doesn't fit. She didn't say anything that day. She didn't have to. That look became a language between us that I spent the next 20 years learning to read. The rules in our family were never written down. They didn't need to be. You absorbed them the way you absorbed everything in that house, through careful observation, through the silences after certain sentences, through the way my father's jaw set when my brother made him proud versus the way he nodded slowly and said interesting when I showed him something I'd made. Interesting in our family meant, I don't know what to do with this. Interesting meant, please stop. I was 14 when I told my mother I wanted to go to culinary school instead of college. She laughed. Not cruelly, that wasn't her style. She laughed the way you laugh when a child says something endearing but obviously impossible, like wanting to be an astronaut or a professional mermaid. Then she changed the subject and never brought it up again, and I understood that it had been filed away under things we do not discuss. I didn't bring it up again either, not for a long time. I learned to make myself smaller around the dinner table, to redirect conversations, to perform the version of myself that generated the least friction. I applied to colleges my parents approved of. I declared a major they found acceptable. I sat through family dinners where my sister's accomplishments were discussed in detail, and my brother's career was analyzed like a matter of national importance. And when anyone asked about me, my mother would say Maya is finding her path in a tone that made it sound like a polite way to say Maya is lost. I was not lost. I was just not going where they wanted me to go. The summer between my junior and senior year of college, I staged at a restaurant in Cambridge for 3 months, unpaid. I told my parents I had an internship with a consulting firm. I don't know if they believed me. I don't know if it mattered. What mattered was that, for those 3 months, I worked 12-hour days in a hot kitchen and learned more about myself than I had in the previous 20 years of my life combined. The chef there was a woman named Diane who had forearms like a longshoreman and a vocabulary that would have made my mother faint, and she was the first person who ever looked at what I could do with food and said, without any qualifiers, "You're good at this." Not interesting. Good. Present tense, declarative, no asterisk. I went back to school in the fall and finished my degree and applied to culinary programs, and I called my parents the night I got my acceptance letter to tell them I was going to Nashville to attend the Culinary Institute there. The silence on the phone lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then my mother said, "We'll talk about this at Easter." We talked about it at Easter. It wasn't a conversation so much as a presentation my parents had prepared, it seemed, for the occasion. My mother had a list of talking points. My father spoke about financial support and the conditions under which it would and would not continue. My sister, home from New York for the weekend, sat at the far end of the table and looked at her phone. My brother, who had always been the kinder of the two, made one attempt to moderate that was quickly absorbed into the overall position of the family, which was, "This is a mistake, and we will not be endorsing it." I moved to Nashville 6 weeks later with my car, my knives, and enough money saved from 3 years of campus jobs to cover 3 months of rent. I didn't expect them to be happy about it. I wasn't naive. But I did not expect what came next, which was something more systematic than anger. Something more deliberate. The first wedding was my sister's, the following spring. I got the call 2 weeks before the date. My mother told me, in a voice that was almost apologetic in its flatness, that my sister had decided to keep the ceremony and reception intimate, and that the guest list had been significantly reduced. When I asked if I was on the guest list, the pause told me everything. My mother said they hoped I would understand. She said it wasn't personal. I was 23 years old, standing in the parking lot of the restaurant where I was working double shifts 6 days a week, and I stood there for a long time after the call ended, not quite able to put the phone in my pocket. My sister hadn't called to tell me herself. I told myself I was okay. I told myself families were complicated. I told myself that I had known, on some level, that this was a possible consequence of the path I had chosen, and I had chosen it anyway, so I had no right to be surprised. I was not okay. But I got back in the car and I drove back to work, and I made food for strangers who didn't know my name, and somewhere in that, I found something that held. The second wedding was my brother's, 2 years later. By then I had finished school, had worked in 2 restaurants, had started to understand what I wanted to build. I was better in my own life, which made it worse somehow when my mother called again. Same voice, same logic, small ceremony, limited space, family only. I wanted to point out that I was, technically, family. I didn't. I said I understood and I got off the phone. My brother texted me the next day. He said he was sorry. He said it wasn't his call. I don't know if that was true, or if it was the story he needed to tell himself. But I texted back that I loved him, and that I hoped he and his wife were very happy, and I meant it, and I cried in my apartment for about an hour, and then I did what I always did, which was I went to work. Here is the thing about being the family scapegoat, and it took me years to find that word, to understand that what was happening had a name and a pattern and that it was not a reflection of something wrong with me. The family scapegoat is not chosen because they are bad. They are chosen because they are visible. Because something about them reveals something the family doesn't want to see in itself. My need to be in the kitchen, my discomfort with the performance of respectability, my inability to want the things they wanted, these were not flaws, they were mirrors. And the easiest thing to do with a mirror is turn it to the wall. I didn't have that language when I was 25. I got it slowly. Through therapy I paid for myself when I could afford it, and delayed when I couldn't. Through books I read with the same attention I gave to cookbooks. Through a conversation at 2 a.m, in the walk-in cooler of a restaurant in East Nashville, with my friend Becca, who was the first person I told the whole story to, beginning to end, without editing the parts that made me look pathetic. Becca said, "They sound exhausting. Not you, poor thing. Not families are complicated. Just, they sound exhausting." And something in me loosened that I hadn't realized was tight. I built my life in Nashville the way I cooked, with attention, without shortcuts, in a way that made sense to no one else but made complete sense to me. I staged at 3 more restaurants. I ran the kitchen at a farm-to-table place in East Nashville for 2 years, and learned how to manage people, how to hold a line together under pressure, how to make decisions fast and live with them. I saved money. I made mistakes. I hired the wrong people and fixed it. I put in 15-hour days and went home to an apartment that had good knives and not much else, and got up and did it again. When I was 27, I found the space on Gallatin Avenue. It had been a hardware store. The bones were right, good ceiling height, big windows, a back area that could become a kitchen if you knew what you were doing, and I knew what I was doing. The landlord was skeptical. The loan officer was skeptical. My financial advisor, who was really just Becca with a spreadsheet, was cautiously optimistic. I named it Ember. I didn't tell my parents I was opening a restaurant. I didn't tell my sister. My brother knew because he had started calling me more regularly by then, and our conversations had become something real and careful, and I didn't want to lose them by saying something that would require him to choose sides. I told him about it in the way I told him about most things, matter-of-factly, without asking for anything. He said, "That's incredible, Maya. You've worked so hard for this." I had to set the phone down for a second. Sometimes kindness arrives in unexpected quantities, and you're not prepared for it. Ember opened on a Thursday in October. The first service was controlled chaos. The second was better. By the end of the first month, there were reservation waits. By the end of the first year, we had been reviewed in the Nashville Scene, in a food blog with national readership, and once, briefly, in a roundup piece in a magazine that I didn't let myself read all the way through because I was afraid of what I'd feel. I had people around me by then who felt more like family than family had. Becca, who had become my general manager and occasional therapist, and the person I called when things fell apart. My sous chef Tariq, who had come from a Michelin restaurant in Chicago, and who had chosen to come work with me anyway, which I still didn't fully understand, but was grateful for every day. A small constellation of people who had appeared over the years and stayed, not because of blood or obligation, but because they wanted to be there, because what I was building meant something to them too. I thought about my family less than I used to. Not because the wound had closed, exactly, but because the life around it had grown large enough that I didn't look at it every day. I met Daniel the summer before Ember turned 2. He was a high school history teacher who had come in for dinner with a group of friends and had asked one of my servers if he could send a note to the kitchen to tell the chef that the duck confit had changed his understanding of what food could be. I kept the note. It embarrassed me that I kept it, but I kept it. We dated for a year and a half in the way that two people who are both serious about their work and serious about each other date imperfectly, with a lot of calendar coordination and a great deal of respect for the fact that the other person had a whole life that existed before you arrived in it. He met Becca. He met Tariq. He came to the restaurant on off nights and sat at the bar and read and didn't demand my attention, and this, I eventually understood, was one of the things I loved most about him. He proposed in the kitchen of my apartment on a Sunday morning in November. No audience. No elaborate setup. He was making coffee and I was reading, and he said, "I've been thinking, do you want to get married?" And I looked up and he was holding a ring, and his hands were slightly unsteady, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. I sat with the engagement for a while before I told my family. Not because I was unsure I was not unsure, but because I needed to decide what their role in this chapter of my life was going to be. I had spent a lot of time in therapy working through what I wanted from them, and what I was capable of asking for, and what the difference was between forgiveness and simply allowing people back into proximity of something precious. What I came to was this. I did not need my family's approval to marry Daniel. I did not need them at my wedding, but I also didn't want to act from the same place they had acted, from exclusion as a weapon, silence as punishment. I wanted to act from clarity. So I called my mother and I told her I was engaged, and I told her that Daniel and I were planning a small wedding with our closest friends and that I would send her photos. She asked if she would be invited. I told her no, and I told her why not, angrily, not with the list of grievances I had rehearsed and discarded over the years, but plainly. I said that I had been excluded from both of my siblings' weddings. I said that I understood the family's position on my choices, and that I had made peace with the fact that those choices were real and non-negotiable. I said that I wished her and my father well, and that I hoped there could be a relationship of some kind between us in the future, but that this day was mine, and I was protecting it. She said, "I see." That was the end of the call. I cried afterward, but it was not the kind of crying I had done in that parking lot 10 years earlier. It was something cleaner, something that had weight but no shame in it. Daniel and I got married on a Saturday in April at a venue outside Nashville, a working farm with a restored barn and a kitchen in the back that the owner let me use to prepare part of the meal myself. Because of course I cooked at my own wedding, because why would I let someone else cook the most important meal of my life? Becca was my maid of honor. Tariq cried during the vows, which he would deny to his grave. 32 people sat in mismatched chairs under string lights, and it was the most genuinely happy room I had ever stood in. A photographer friend named Lenora came and documented it with the same attention she brought to her fine arts work. 2 weeks after the wedding, without telling me, Lenora submitted a set of her photos to a regional lifestyle magazine called The Tennessee Table, a quarterly publication with a substantial print and digital readership that covered food, culture, and life in the South. The spread they published featured 4 of her photos. One of them was the exterior of Ember with lights on at dusk. 2 were from the wedding. One was of me at the kitchen pass, mid-service, hair pinned up, completely in my element. The headline on the piece was, "The Chef Who Built Her Kitchen on Her Own Terms." I didn't know it was published until Tariq sent me the link at 7 in the morning with a string of fire emojis. I sat in my car in the parking lot behind Ember and read the article 3 times. They had interviewed Lenora, and Becca, and a couple of our regular guests. They described Ember as one of the most quietly essential restaurants in the city. They described me as someone who had built something lasting from scratch, without a net. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and looked out the windshield for a while. Then I went inside and started prep. The magazine had a social media following in the hundreds of thousands. The post performed well enough to be picked up by a national food media account, which posted one of the wedding photos with a caption about the restaurant. Within 48 hours, Ember's phone had rung so many times that Becca had to set up a separate booking line. My brother called me on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after the article came out. He said he had seen it. He said it was beautiful and that he was proud of me and that he was sorry he had missed the wedding. It was the kind of apology that cost something. You could hear the weight of it, and I accepted it in the same spirit it was offered. We talked for an hour about his kids and my new menu and Daniel and the restaurant, and when we hung up, I felt something that I had almost given up on feeling about my family, which was hope, just a thread of it, but real. My parents called on a Friday, both of them, together, on speakerphone. My mother's voice had the particular quality it gets when she has prepared what she is going to say, the sentences landing with a little too much precision. She said they had seen the article. She said they had not known the wedding had already happened. She said they were hurt. I let her finish. Then I said, "You weren't invited. I told you that." My father's voice came in then, the lawyer's register, the one that made everything sound like a point being scored. He said they felt they should have been given the opportunity to be there for a decision of this magnitude. He said that what I had done was hurtful to the family. He said that they hadn't expected me to hold a grudge. I want to tell you that I said something devastating and elegant, that I had a line ready. I didn't. I just sat with the phone and felt the old familiar weight of being the one in this family who was supposed to apologize for existing wrong, and I waited for it to settle. And then I said, calmly and without drama, "You didn't invite me to my sister's wedding. You didn't invite me to my brother's wedding. Both times. You called me 2 weeks before and told me the guest list was limited. I was 23 the first time. I'm telling you now what I should have told you then. That was not okay. What I did was not a grudge. It was a boundary. Those are different things." Another silence. This one had a different texture than the earlier ones in my life, less like a verdict, more like something being absorbed. My mother said, "We thought you understood." I said, "I did understand. That's exactly the problem." The call ended without resolution, which is the honest way most of these calls end. There was no movie moment, no tearful reconciliation, no speech that suddenly unlocked 20 years of pattern. My mother didn't say she was sorry. My father didn't say he'd been wrong. What happened was smaller and more real than that. I told the truth in a voice I didn't have to borrow from anyone. And I got off the phone and I called Becca and I said that was hard and she said, "I know. I'm coming over," and she did. Growth, I've learned, is not usually a single scene. It's the accumulation of many small moments where you choose yourself instead of the story you were handed. There's a thing that happens sometimes in my kitchen, mid-service, when everything is moving at exactly the right speed, tickets coming in at a pace the line can handle, the music at the right volume, everyone knowing their role, and executing it without friction. The food going out looking the way I see it in my head before I build it. In those moments, I feel something that I don't have a better word for than right, not happy, exactly though I am happy, just right, like the thing and the person doing the thing are a match. My family tried to tell me that the thing I loved was not respectable, that the life I wanted was beneath what I was capable of. They were wrong about that, and they were wrong about something more fundamental too, that their approval was something I needed in order to be whole. I spent a long time believing I needed it. I don't think I knew I had stopped believing it until I was standing in my own kitchen, in a city I had chosen, surrounded by people who had chosen me back, and I realized I hadn't thought about their opinion in 3 days. 3 days is a long time when you've spent 20 years checking. Daniel and I had dinner at Ember last week on a slow Tuesday, seated at the corner table by the window that I save for us when we can use it. He ordered the seasonal pasta I'd been tweaking. He ate it slowly, the way he eats everything I make, with the full attention he gave to things that mattered to him. He said, "This one's the best yet." I told him it needed another week. He said, "It doesn't, but okay." I looked around the room at the tables, the light, the window onto Gallatin Avenue, where the evening was blue and soft, and I thought about the girl who stood in a parking lot in Nashville at 23, holding a phone after being told she wasn't wanted at her sister's wedding. I thought about everything she had done between then and now. Every shift, every mistake, every hard conversation, every choice that no one in her family validated before she made it. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone, saying they hoped I'd understand. I do understand. I understand all of it now. I understand that they were not able to love the parts of me that didn't fit their picture, and I understand that this was a failure in them, not a verdict on me, and I understand that forgiveness is not the same as erasure, and that I can hold both the hurt and the life I built because of it without one canceling the other. I understand that the kitchen is not no place for someone with my potential. The kitchen is exactly where my potential lives. My phone lights up on the table. It's a text from my brother, a photo of his daughter, who is 4 years old and apparently very serious about helping with dinner tonight. She is standing on a step stool in his kitchen, stirring something in a pot, looking at the camera with the focused expression of someone who has important work to do. He writes, "She says she wants to be a chef like Aunt Maya." I show it to Daniel. He smiles. I write back a single word, "Good." And then I look up at my restaurant, full on a Tuesday, full the way I imagined it when it was still just a hardware store with good bones and a dream I hadn't told anyone yet, and I let myself feel everything, the loss, the work, the love, the cost of it, and the extraordinary stubborn fact of what it became. I let it all be true at once. That's the thing they never taught me in Wellesley, the thing no one in my family had words for. You can be hurt by the people who are supposed to hold you, and you can build something extraordinary anyway, not despite the hurt, not to prove something, just because the thing inside you that needs to be made is real, and it was always real, and it was always worth building. The candle on our table flickers. In the kitchen, someone drops a pan and there's a crash and then laughter. The evening rushes forward. I am exactly where I'm supposed to be,